Welcome, we're so happy you tuned in tonight. Before we get started, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Now, let's get comfortable and drift into deep, peaceful sleep together. Front porch at 2 in the morning, watching rain hammer the street into submission. Water poured from the gutters in thick, trembling sheets that caught the streetlight and turned it into something almost phosphorescent. She'd come outside because the apartment felt too small for her thoughts, too quiet except for the specific silence that comes from not making a phone call you've been thinking about for 6 hours. The neighbourhood looked drowned. Every house had its gutters overwhelmed, spilling water in places they weren't designed to handle, and every porch, every eave, every overhang seemed to have wind chimes, the decorative kind that neighbours hung and forgot about until nights like this, when the wind gave them permission to be loud. Maya pulled her cardigan tighter. The rain smelled like wet asphalt and ozone, clean in a way that made her want to stand there longer, even though her slippers were already soaked through. She'd been holding her phone for the past hour, thumb hovering over a name she hadn't called in 3 months, her ex-best friend Rachel. The fight had been stupid. Something about a borrowed dress and a misunderstood text, and the particular way women in their 30s could turn small things into grenades. Maya had typed and deleted probably 15 messages tonight. Each one felt either too apologetic or not apologetic enough, too casual or too heavy, too much like she was pretending nothing had happened, or too much like she was making it a bigger deal than it needed to be. So she'd come outside to stop thinking about it, to let the rain wash away the urge. That's when she noticed the gutter above her porch making a sound it shouldn't make. Click, click, pause, click, 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 pause. It wasn't the normal chaos of water hitting metal, it was rhythmic, deliberate, like something tapping out a pattern, testing the resonance. Maya tilted her head, listening. The sound came from where the gutter met the downspout, the corner of the porch roof, a shadowed junction she'd never paid attention to before. Click, 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 click. Her heart did something strange in her chest. A small stumble, a catch, and the clicking stopped exactly when her heartbeat stuttered, then resumed in perfect sync. Maya held her breath. The clicking stopped. She exhaled slowly, and the gutter answered with a soft, patient tip. Jesus, she whispered, stepping back. Coincidence. Had to be. Just water hitting a loose bracket or a piece of debris caught in the channel. She was tired, overthinking, projecting her anxiety onto weather patterns, because that's what insomniacs did at 2 in the morning. But then the wind chime on her neighbour's porch across the street began to ring. Not the scattered random sound of wind moving through metal tubes. This was deliberate, the same rhythm as the gutter. Click, click, pause, click, click, click. Like the chime was answering the gutter, or the gutter was teaching the chime a pattern it needed to remember. Maya's phone felt heavier in her cardigan pocket. Not physically heavier, that would be insane, but weighted with intention, with the mass of an unmade decision. She could feel it there like a small stone, warm from her body heat, carrying all those unsent messages in its digital memory. Another chime joined in, this one 2 houses down, barely visible through the rain. Then another, farther up the block. They weren't loud. The storm was too aggressive for them to be loud, but they were coordinated, synchronized, building towards something. Maya's neighbour, Mrs. Kelly, had told her once about the gutters. It was during that first week after Maya moved in, when Mrs. Kelly brought over a casserole and stayed for an hour sharing the kind of neighbourhood lore that sounded like friendly hazing. She'd mentioned something about not standing under the eaves too long during storms. Old superstition, Mrs. Kelly had said, waving it away with arthritic fingers. My grandmother used to say the gutters talk back if you let them. Said there was something that lived in the overflow, something that collected sounds you meant to make but didn't. Maya had smiled politely and eaten the casserole and forgotten about it until right now, standing in the rain with her heartbeat being echoed by her own house. She looked up toward the gutter corner. The rain made it hard to see anything clearly, just darkness beneath the soffit. Shadows where the roofline created a small sheltered space. There was something about the shadow that didn't move right. It hung there too vertically, too still, like a long coat suspended from nothing. The edges suggested shoulders, arms, the drape of fabric. But when Maya tried to focus on any specific detail, it dissolved into darkness and rain. The clicking intensified, not louder, but faster, more insistent. Click, 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 click. Her heart responded, speeding up to match. Maya pressed her hand against her chest, trying to slow her breathing, but the gutter kept pace like it was conducting her cardiovascular system, like it had learned the rhythm and was now leading instead of following. The chimes around the block began to ring in tighter clusters, and underneath the metallic tones Maya heard something that made her skin go cold despite the humid air. A suggestion of words. Not actual words, nothing she could transcribe or repeat, but the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of a sentence being shaped, the pause where a breath would go, the emphasis on what might be a name. It sounded like her own voice trying to speak through metal. Maya stumbled backward, off the porch, into the full force of the rain. Water hit her face like small accusations. The chimes continued their strange chorus, and she realized with absolute certainty that they weren't random. They were rehearsing, practicing the shape of something she'd been carrying in her throat all day, all week, all 3 months since the fight. I'm sorry. I should have called. I miss you. The sentence she'd typed and deleted and rephrased and deleted again. The apology that felt both necessary and impossible. The words that sat in her chest like stones because she didn't know how to make them sound right, how to make them land without sounding desperate or insincere or too little too late. The coat-hung shape beneath the soffit swayed slightly. Not with the wind, with the rhythm of the clicking, like it was being rocked by the gutter's pulse, fed by the coordination of the chimes, sustained by the presence of unspoken words in the air. Maya's grandmother had been superstitious too, different traditions than Mrs. Kelly's family, the same fundamental understanding that some things demanded specific rules, that the world had edges where normal physics bent around older agreements, that you could negotiate with the strange if you knew what it wanted. The rule arrived in Maya's mind with the clarity of inherited knowledge. If the gutter song starts repeating your rhythm, you must place one small strip of cloth into the downspout mouth and silently let one unsent sentence die for tonight. She didn't question where the rule came from, didn't analyse whether she actually believed it, or whether she was having some kind of exhaustion-induced break from reality. The chimes were ringing in her cadence, the gutter was conducting her heartbeat. The shadow beneath the eave was too tall and too narrow and had too many angles to be just shadow. Maya reached into her cardigan pocket and found what she was looking for without knowing she'd been looking for it. A small strip of fabric from the lining, already half torn from where the seam had started to fray weeks ago. She pulled it loose completely, feeling the threads give way with a soft sound that seemed too loud in the rain. The cloth was dark blue, worn soft from washing, carrying the smell of her detergent and her apartment. Personal, intentional, and offering that cost something small but real. She approached the porch again, moving slowly, keeping her eyes on the downspout opening where water funneled down in a thick, urgent stream. She didn't look up at the soffit shadows, didn't try to see the coat-hung shape more clearly. Some things were better witnessed peripherally. The downspout mouth was a round metal opening about 3 inches across, corroded slightly at the edges, surrounded by the constant pressure of overflow. Maya reached up with the fabric strip, her hand shaking, and tucked it into the opening. The cloth darkened instantly, soaked through, heavy with rain. It caught on the metal edge and hung there like a small flag, like a marker of surrender. Then came the harder part. Maya closed her eyes and thought about the text messages she'd written and deleted, the phone calls she'd almost made, the apology she'd been carrying like cargo. I'm sorry. I should have called. I miss you. The words that had been living in her chest for 3 months, gaining weight and complexity and fear. With every day she didn't speak them. She had to let them die. Not forever. The rule was specific about that. For tonight. She had to refuse to give them sound, had to keep them silent and unpreserved, pressed behind her ribs where they couldn't be taxidermied into permanence by whatever was listening in the gutter bends. It felt like swallowing glass, like choosing to stay lost when you could ask for directions, like deliberately maintaining a wound because healing it would require a conversation you weren't ready for. But Maya did it. She kept the sentence silent, held it in her throat until it hurt, then pushed it back down, refusing to let it become sound the storm could collect and preserve and ring through wind chimes for the rest of her life. The gutter clicking broke its spell. The pattern loosened, returning to chaotic water noises, normal, random, physical. The chimes around the block lost their coordination, drifting back into scattered tinks and wind-driven accidents. The coat-hung shape beneath the soffit became just shadow and rain again, unable to hold form without a sentence to stuff inside its hollow metal body. Maya stood there breathing hard, her hand still raised toward the downspout where the blue fabric hung dark and limp. The rain continued its assault on the neighbourhood. The gutters overflowed, the chimes rang, but it was all just weather now. Just metal and water and wind doing what they were designed to do. She went back inside with the odd relief of unfinished communication. Proof that not every urge needed to become action immediately. that silence could be a boundary instead of a punishment, that some words could wait until they were ready to be said right. Maya dried her hair with a towel and put on fresh socks, and left her phone on the kitchen counter, face down, while she tried to sleep. She made it to her bedroom, changed into dry pyjamas and lay in, bed listening to the rain against the window. Her apartment was a converted upper floor of an old Victorian that had been split into 4 units. The building had good bones but temperamental plumbing, walls that transmitted sound like they were designed for it, and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests on a timeline that could only be described as geological. The rain sounded different from inside, softer, more rhythmic in a natural way that didn't match heartbeats or suggest coordination. Maya pulled the blanket up to her chin and tried to focus on her breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The meditation technique her therapist had taught her for managing anxiety. She almost succeeded at sleeping. But at 3:30 in the morning, lying in bed and listening to the rain against her window, she made a mistake. "I should call her," Maya whispered into the darkness of her bedroom. Just 4 words, barely audible, said to no one, meant for no one, just the kind of thing you mutter to yourself when you're alone and tired and the defences are down. Outside, the gutter reacted like it had been waiting for permission. The clicking sharpened, became precise, no longer matching her heartbeat, now creating its own rhythm, hammering something into shape. The chimes started ringing in a clean, repeating sequence that sounded less like music and more like a phrase being forged. Consonants almost formed in the metal tones, vowels suggested by the spaces between sounds. Maya sat up in bed, her heart hammering. The downspout's mouth made a sound too close to swallowing. She got out of bed and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the porch. The blue fabric strip was gone from the downspout opening. The rain was heavier now, more violent, and in the shadows beneath the soffit the coat-hung shape was clearer, taller, more detailed. She could see the suggestion of a head too narrow, tilted at an angle that would break, a human neck, arms that hung too long and too thin, the drape of something like fabric with the sheen of wet metal, as if the thing was made of the same material as the gutters and downspouts and chimes, all of it sewn together into a shape that could stand and sway and listen. Chimebrack. The name arrived like a memory of something Mrs. Kelly had mentioned and Maya had dismissed. A lank creature that lived in gutter bends and soffit shadows, where water couldn't quite wash everything clean. Not a hunter of bodies, but a collector of sounds, you meant to say. A taxidermist of intention, preserving the urge to speak in hollow metal so it could keep ringing without you. Maya stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall. Her hands were shaking. The logical part of her brain, the part that had gotten her through college and a failed engagement and 3 different jobs in 5 years, insisted this was impossible. Creatures didn't live in gutters. Shadows didn't learn to speak. Metal couldn't preserve intention, but the rest of her, the part that remembered her grandmother's warnings about leaving shoes pointing toward the door and never whistling at night and always saying goodbye to houses before you left them, knew better. The world was stranger than logic allowed. There were rules older than reason. She needed to talk to Mrs. Kelly. Maya checked her phone. 3:42 in the morning. Too late to knock on an elderly woman's door, even in an emergency. Even if that emergency involved a metal creature learning to speak in your voice. She'd have to wait until morning, until a reasonable hour, until she could frame the conversation in a way that didn't sound completely insane. She got back into bed but didn't close her eyes. The chimes continued their performance outside, coordinated, insistent, building toward something. She could hear her own cadence in them now, clear enough to be undeniable, a specific rhythm of how she spoke when she was being careful, when she was trying to say something important without making it too heavy. "I'm sorry. I should have called. I miss you." The sentence rang through the neighbourhood in hollow metal tones, and Maya understood with cold clarity that she'd made a terrible mistake. The rule had been specific. Silence for the night. Complete silence. She'd spoken. She'd given voice to her intention, even if only in a whisper, even if only to herself. And that had been permission enough. She lay there until dawn, listening to the storm learn her voice. The rain stopped around 6 in the morning. Maya watched the sky lighten through her window, watched the streetlights click off one by one as natural light took over. The chimes fell silent. The gutters returned to their normal dripping. The neighbourhood woke up to the kind of clean, washed morning that made the previous night feel like a fever dream. Maya got dressed in yesterday's jeans and a clean sweater, made coffee she didn't drink, stared at her phone and thought about calling Rachel, and then thought about the chimes and decided against it. She needed to understand what was happening before she made anything worse. At 7:30, she heard movement from the apartment below hers. Mrs. Kelly was an early riser, always had been. Maya had learned her schedule in the first month of living here. Morning sounds at 7, evening news at 6, lights out by 9:30. Predictable. Comforting in the way that elderly neighbours could be when you were living alone for the first time in years. Maya grabbed her keys and went downstairs. The building's main hallway smelled like old wood, and the lemon cleaning spray the landlord used once a month, whether the place needed it or not. Mrs. Kelly's door was the first on the left, marked with a small brass number 1, and a welcome mat that said Blessed Be in fading letters. Maya knocked, waited, knocked again. Mrs. Kelly opened the door wearing a floral housecoat and slippers, her white hair still in the rollers she must have slept in. She looked at Maya with sharp blue eyes that didn't match her age, taking in the unwashed hair and the shadows under Maya's eyes, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from a sleepless night. "You look like hell, dear," Mrs. Kelly said. "Come in." The apartment was exactly what Maya expected. Lace doilies and family photos, and the kind of knickknacks that accumulated over 70-plus years of living. It smelled like instant coffee and something baking, even though it was too early for baking. Mrs. Kelly led her to a small kitchen table covered in a checkered tablecloth and gestured for her to sit. "I'm guessing this is about the storm," Mrs. Kelly said, pouring coffee from a pot that looked older than Maya. "And the gutters, and the thing that lives in them." Maya's relief was so profound she almost started crying. "You believe me?" "Believe you?" Mrs. Kelly set a mug in front of Maya and sat down, across from her. "Dear, I've lived in this neighbourhood for 43 years. I've seen 5 people go through what you're going through. Believe is the wrong word, I know. What is it?" Maya wrapped her hands around the mug, needing the warmth even though the apartment was too hot. "What's happening to me?" Mrs. Kelly took a long sip of her coffee, considering. "My grandmother called it chimbrack, said it came over with the old country families, the ones who settled this area back when it was just farmland and dirt roads. It's not evil exactly, more like hungry. It feeds on intention, on the words we mean to say but keep locked up inside." "Why?" Maya asked. "Why does it care about unsaid things?" "Because unsaid things have power," Mrs. Kelly said simply. "They're pure potential. They could heal or hurt, create or destroy, but they haven't done any of those things yet. They're suspended, unresolved, and something about that state, that liminal space between thought and speech, sustains it, nourishes it." Maya thought about the apology she'd been carrying, the weight of it, the way it had grown heavier with each day she didn't make the call. "What does it do with them? The words it collects?" "Preserves them," Mrs. Kelly said, "like you'd preserve a butterfly in resin or a flower in wax. It takes the urge to speak and gives it permanent form, stuffs it into the chimes and gutters so it keeps ringing even after you're gone. Some people find it comforting, actually, knowing their intentions are preserved somewhere, even if they never got spoken." "That doesn't sound comforting," Maya said. "It sounds like torture." "Does it?" Mrs. Kelly raised an eyebrow. "Think about it. All the things you've wanted to say over the years that you couldn't. All the apologies and confessions and declarations that got stuck in your throat. Wouldn't it be easier if something else took responsibility for them? If they got preserved somewhere safe where you didn't have to risk actually communicating?" Maya stared at her coffee. The logic was seductive in a horrible way. The safety of preserved intention without the risk of rejection, or misunderstanding, or making things worse. But it was also a kind of death, a way of staying frozen instead of moving forward. "You said 5 people," Maya said. 5 people have gone through this. What happened to them?" Mrs. Kelly's expression darkened. 3 of them made the call, spoke the words, broke the preservation before it became permanent. They're fine, still living in the neighbourhood, still making mistakes and apologising and communicating like normal people. "And the other 2? "One of them moved away," Mrs. Kelly said. "Couldn't handle it. Packed up in the middle of the night and left everything behind. Last I heard she was in Arizona, never came back. And the 5th person..." Mrs. Kelly stood up and walked to the window looking out at the street. The morning sun made everything look clean and innocent. Suburban. Safe. "The 5th person let Chimbrack keep everything. Every unsaid sentence, every unspoken apology, every confession that got stuck. He became a collector of his own preserved intentions. The chimes ring his words during every storm. Have been for 15 years now. That's..." Maya couldn't find words adequate for how horrifying that sounded. "His name was Thomas Waite," Mrs. Kelly continued. "Lived in your apartment, actually, before it was converted into separate units, back when the whole building was a single-family home. He had a wife, 2 daughters. He worked too much, never said what he meant, always put off the important conversations. And Chimbrack collected it all. Every 'I love you,' he meant to say. Every "I'm sorry" that got postponed. Every conversation he promised himself he'd have tomorrow. What happened to him? Heart attack at 52, Mrs. Kelly said. Found him in the downstairs hallway one Tuesday morning. During storms, you can still hear him. The chimes ring in his patterns, his rhythms. Sometimes late at night when the rain is heavy, you can almost hear him trying to tell his daughters he loved them. Maya set her coffee down with shaking hands. I don't want that. I don't want to become a collection of things I meant to say. Then you know what you have to do, Mrs. Kelly turned from the window. Make the call, say the words, break the preservation before it becomes permanent. You've got maybe 3 more storms before Coimbrack locks you in. After that, every sentence you don't speak becomes part of the collection. 3 storms, Maya repeated. How do you know? Because that's how long it took for Thomas, Mrs. Kelly said. First storm, the gutters learn your rhythm. Second storm, the chimes learn your voice. Third storm, Chimebrack builds itself a complete enough shape to preserve you permanently. Fourth storm, you're locked. After that, there's no breaking free. Maya stood up feeling dizzy. Last night was the first storm. Then you've got time, Mrs. Kelly said. Not much, but enough. Make the call, dear. Whatever you've been putting off saying, say it. Risk the rejection. Risk the awkwardness. Risk making it worse. Because I promise you, whatever happens when you actually communicate will be better than spending the rest of your life preserved in metal. Maya thanked her and left, climbing the stairs back to her apartment with Mrs. Kelly's warnings echoing in her head. 3 storms. She had 3 storms to break free. The weather forecast would tell her how much time that actually meant. Back in her apartment, Maya checked her phone. The forecast showed clear skies for the next 4 days, then a 70% chance of rain on Friday. That gave her 4 days. 4 days to find the courage to make a phone call she should have made months ago. She spent those 4 days in a strange state of suspended anxiety. Work became white noise. She had a job doing data, entry for an insurance company, the kind of work that paid the bills but required minimal mental engagement. She went through her shifts on autopilot, typing numbers into spreadsheets, avoiding conversations with co-workers, eating lunch alone in her car. At home, she found herself hyper-aware of every sound the building made. The pipes clanking when someone upstairs ran water. The settling noises that old houses make at night. The rain gutters dripping when someone watered their garden. Every metallic sound made her flinch, made her check the windows, made her hold her breath and listen for patterns. She drafted and deleted more messages to Rachel, picked up her phone a dozen times a day and put it back down. The apology grew heavier in her chest, more complex, more weighted with the knowledge of what would happen if she didn't speak it. Wednesday evening she went for a walk around the neighbourhood. It was something her therapist had recommended for anxiety. Gentle exercise, fresh air, a change of scenery. But as she walked, Maya found herself paying attention to things she'd never noticed before. Every house had wind chimes. Not just a few, every single house. Some had multiple sets, different sizes and materials, hanging from porches and trees and garden hooks. They were quiet now in the still evening air, but Maya could imagine them during a storm, could picture them all ringing in coordination, learning voices, preserving intentions. She stopped in front of a blue bungalow 3 houses down from her building. An elderly man was watering his garden, moving slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he held the hose. Maya had seen him before but never spoken to him. He looked up as she approached. "Evening," he said. His voice was rough, underused. "Hi," Maya said. "I'm Maya. I live in the converted Victorian down the street." "I know," he said. "Seen you round. I'm Frank." He stood there awkwardly for a moment. Maya noticed the wind chimes hanging from Frank's porch. 3 different sets, all of them old, the metal tarnished and weathered. "Those are beautiful chimes," Maya said, just to say something. Frank followed her gaze. His expression shifted, became distant. "Yeah, had those for about 20 years now. Can't seem to take them down." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long time, the water from his hose making dark patterns in the soil. "They say things I couldn't," he said finally. "During the storms, they ring in patterns I recognize, sentences I meant to tell my daughter before she stopped speaking to me. Figured if I keep the chimes up, at least the words exist somewhere." Maya felt cold despite the warm evening. "You know about Chimebrack?" Frank looked at her sharply. "You're having the dreams too, then. The clicking that matches your heartbeat, the sense that something's listening." "It's not dreams," Maya said. "It's real. Mrs. Kelly told me about Thomas Waite, about what happens if you let it preserve you. Thomas was a friend of mine," Frank said quietly. "Watched it happen to him. Watched him choose silence over risk, preservation over communication. Swore I'd never let it happen to me." He gestured at the chimes with the hose, water arcing through the evening air. Here I am anyway. 20 years of preserved intentions, my daughter's birthday wishes, apologies for missing her wedding, the explanation for why I was such a terrible father, all of it ringing through my chimes every time it rains. Why don't you call her? Maya asked. It's not too late. You could still say those things. Frank smiled, and it was one of the saddest expressions Maya had ever seen. I waited too long. After the third storm, Chimebrack locked me in. Now the words are preserved. They belong to the chimes, not to me anymore. Even if I called her, even if I said everything I meant to say, it wouldn't matter. The intention is already taxidermied, dead and mounted and on permanent display. He turned off the hose and walked toward his house, moving like every step hurt. Don't wait, Maya, he said without looking back. Whatever you're carrying, whoever you need to call, do it before Friday. Do it before the second storm, because once Chimebrack gets a real taste of your voice, it won't let go. Maya walked home with Frank's words circling in her head. She passed more houses with wind chimes, more gardens with decorative downspouts, more eaves and soffits where shadows pooled in ways that suggested waiting shapes. The neighbourhood suddenly felt different. Not safe and suburban, but full of preserved intentions. Full of people who'd waited too long to speak and now spent every storm listening to metal ring their unsaid sentences. Thursday evening she made dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, the kind of meal that required minimal thought, and sat at her kitchen table with her phone in front of her. Rachel's contact information glowing on the screen, her finger hovering over the call button. She thought about Frank's chimes ringing birthday wishes to a daughter who would never hear them. About Thomas Waite dying with a collection of I love you that had never reached his family. About Mrs. Kelly's warning that she had 3 storms and the second one was coming tomorrow. Maya pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Rachel's cheerful recorded voice asking her to leave a message. Maya hung up without speaking. Her hand was shaking. She tried again. Same result. Tried a third time and got the same voicemail, the same cheerful request to leave a message after the beep. She didn't leave a message. Couldn't make the words come out right when she was talking to a recording instead of a person. The apology needed to be real time, needed to be a conversation, needed to be more than just her voice speaking into a void. Maya checked the time. 8:30 on Thursday night. Rachel might be at dinner, might be at the gym, might be deliberately ignoring calls from a number she'd been avoiding for 3 months. No way to know without asking, and no way to ask without getting through. She sent a text instead. Can we talk? I know it's been a while. I'm sorry. I miss you. Message delivered. No response. Maya stared at the screen for 20 minutes, watching for the 3 dots that would indicate Rachel was typing. Nothing. She put the phone down and tried to watch television, couldn't focus on anything except the time and the weather forecast, and the awareness that she had less than 24 hours before the second storm. Friday morning arrived grey and humid. The forecast had been upgraded to 85% chance of rain. Storms expected to begin around 6 in the evening and continue through the night. Maya called in sick to work, the first time she'd done that in 8 months, and spent the day in her apartment checking her phone every 5 minutes, rehearsing what she'd say if Rachel called back. Rachel didn't. Call back. At noon, Maya tried calling again. Voicemail. She left a message this time, rambling and awkward, asking Rachel to please call her, saying she knew the fight had been stupid and she should have reached out sooner and she really needed to talk. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. She hung up feeling worse than before. 1 in the afternoon. Still no response to the text or the voicemail. Maya paced her apartment, feeling the walls close in. She thought about going to Rachel's apartment, just showing up and forcing the conversation. That felt like too much. Too aggressive. Like the kind of gesture that would make things worse instead of better. 2 in the afternoon. The sky was getting darker. Maya could smell rain in the air, that particular ozone scent that meant storms were building somewhere close. 3 in the afternoon. Maya's phone rang. She grabbed it so fast she almost dropped it. Unknown number. Not Rachel. She answered anyway, desperate for any kind of human contact. Is this Maya Waters? A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about Rachel Morrison. You're listed as her emergency contact. The world tilted. Maya sat down hard on her couch. What happened? Ms. Morrison was in a car accident this morning, Dr. Chen said. She's stable. She's been unconscious since she arrived. We're monitoring her closely. She had her phone with her, and we found your contact information. Can you come to the hospital? Maya was already grabbing her keys, her jacket, her wallet. I'm on my way. Is she going to be okay? We're doing everything we can, Dr. Chen said, which wasn't really an answer but was probably the only answer she was allowed to give. She's in the ICU. Check in at the main desk when you arrive. call ended. Maya stood in her apartment, keys in hand, trying to process what she'd just heard. Rachel was hurt, Rachel was unconscious, Rachel had kept Maya, listed as her emergency contact even after 3 months of silence. And there were things Maya needed to say that might not get said if she waited too long. She drove to Mercy General through the increasingly ominous afternoon, watching clouds build in the west. The hospital was 30 minutes across town, a sprawling complex of buildings that looked like they'd been added onto over decades, without any coherent architectural plan. Maya parked in the visitor lot and ran for the main entrance, feeling the first drops of rain hit her face. The ICU was on the 4th floor. Maya checked in at the main desk, gave her name, explained her relationship to Rachel. The nurse looked at her with professional sympathy and pointed her toward room 417. Rachel looked small in the hospital bed. She had a bandage on her forehead, an IV in her arm, monitors beeping quietly beside her. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was even and steady. She didn't respond when Maya said her name. Maya pulled her chair up beside the bed and took Rachel's hand. It was warm, alive, real. She thought about all the messages she'd drafted and deleted, all the calls she'd almost made, all the words that had been sitting in her chest for 3 months, growing heavier and more complex with each day of silence. "I'm sorry," Maya said to Rachel's unconscious form. "I'm so sorry. The fight was stupid. I was stupid. I should have called weeks ago. I should have texted. I should have shown up at your apartment with apology coffee and made you listen to me. I missed you every single day, and I was too scared to say it because I thought, maybe you were better off without me. Maybe I'd ruined everything too badly to fix it. Maybe my apology would just make things worse." She was crying now, ugly crying, the kind that made her nose run and her breathing hitch. "But I'm saying it now because I can't risk not saying it. I can't risk you not knowing. You're my best friend. You're the person I want to call when good. Things happen, and when bad things happen, and when nothing happens, and I'm just bored. I love you. Not in a romantic way, in a you're my family way, in a I can't imagine my life without you in it way, and I'm so fucking sorry I let my pride and my fear keep me from telling you that sooner." Rachel didn't respond. The monitors continued their steady beeping. Maya held her hand and cried and said everything she'd been carrying for 3 months, every iteration of the apology she'd drafted and deleted, every version of the explanation she'd rehearsed and abandoned. She said it all to an unconscious person who couldn't hear her. She said it anyway, because the words needed to exist outside of her chest, needed to be spoken instead of preserved. She stayed for 2 hours. A nurse came in to check Rachel's vitals and told Maya visiting hours would end at 8. Maya nodded, still holding Rachel's hand, still talking in a low, steady stream about everything and nothing, the job, the neighbourhood, the friend group they'd shared before the fight fractured it, the inside jokes they'd accumulated over a decade. At 7:30, as Maya was preparing to leave, Rachel's hand twitched. Maya froze. "Rachel?" Rachel's eyes moved under their closed lids. The breathing changed rhythm. The monitors beeped slightly faster. "Rachel, it's Maya. I'm here. Can you hear me?" Rachel's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, confused, then finding Maya's face and sharpening with recognition. "Maya?" Her voice was rough, barely audible. "I'm here," Maya said, squeezing her hand. "I'm so sorry, I love you. I should have called months ago." Rachel's lips moved into something that might have been a smile. "You called yesterday, left a weird voicemail. You got it?" Maya hadn't expected that. Hadn't thought Rachel would check her messages before getting into a car accident. "Was going to call you back," Rachel said. "Was driving to your place, actually, to talk. And some asshole ran a red light." She closed her eyes again, exhausted from the effort of speaking. "Your timing sucks, Waters." Maya laughed, still crying. "I know. I'm sorry. For everything. For being a coward. For waiting so long. For all of it." "Me too," Rachel whispered. "Missed you." They sat there in silence for a moment, hands linked, 3 months of separation dissolving into the simple fact of presence. Then Rachel's eyes opened again, more alert now. "You look terrible," she said. "What's wrong? Something else is wrong." Maya wanted to lie, wanted to say everything was fine now that they were talking again. But Rachel had always been able to read her, had always known when Maya was holding something back. "There's something happening in my neighbourhood," Maya said slowly. "Something with the rain and the gutters, and this thing called chimebrack that preserves words you don't say. It sounds insane, but it's real, and I've been terrified that if I didn't talk to you before the second storm, I'd lose my chance to say any of this." Rachel stared at her. "Are you having a breakdown?" "I don't think so," Maya said, "but I'm not sure. Mrs. Kelly, my neighbour, she told me about it." And there's this man, Frank, who's been locked into his preserved intentions for 20 years, and I can hear the chimes learning my voice and the gutters clicking in my heartbeat, and I sound absolutely insane right now, don't I? A little bit, Rachel admitted. But she didn't let go of Maya's hand. You've always been weird about superstitions. Remember when you wouldn't walk under that ladder for 3 blocks and we were late to the movie? My grandmother taught me to respect the old rules, Maya said. I know, Rachel squeezed her hand, and I'm not saying I believe in gutter monsters. I believe that you're scared, and I believe that you needed to talk to me. So we're talking, storm or no storm, chimebrack or no chimebrack. Okay. Maya nodded, feeling something loosen in her chest. The weight of the unsaid apology lifting, dissolving, becoming something that had been communicated instead of preserved. Okay. The nurse came in to tell Maya visiting hours were over. Maya promised to come back tomorrow. Rachel told her to bring decent coffee because hospital coffee was terrible. They said goodbye with the easy affection of a friendship that had survived its first real fight, and Maya left feeling lighter than she had in months. She drove home through the beginning of the storm. Rain was starting to fall, light at first, then heavier. By the time she pulled into her parking spot behind the Victorian, it was a full downpour. She ran for the building entrance, getting soaked in the 30 feet between her car and the door. Inside, she climbed the stairs to her apartment, dripping water on the old wood floors. She could hear the rain hammering the roof, the gutters gurgling with overflow. But when she listened carefully, the sounds were just weather, just normal storm noises. No clicking that matched her heartbeat. No coordinated rhythm. Maya went to her bedroom window and looked out at the neighbourhood. The wind chimes were ringing, all of them, dozens of them up and down the street. They sounded random, uncoordinated, just metal tubes being moved by wind and rain, making the sounds they were designed to make. She looked up at her own soffit, at the gutter corner where she'd seen the coat-hung shape. There was nothing there, just shadow and rain and architecture. The apology had been spoken. The intention had been communicated instead of preserved. Chimebrack had nothing to hold on to, nothing to taxidermy, nothing to stuff into hollow metal and ring through storms forever. Maya closed the curtain and got ready for bed, listening to the rain with the kind of peace that comes from finishing something difficult. She'd made the call, or rather she'd shown up and said the words face to face, which was even better. She'd risked the rejection and the awkwardness, and the possibility of making things worse, and it had worked. She slept through the second storm without dreams. Saturday morning arrived clean and bright. Maya made coffee, checked her phone, found a text from Rachel sent at 6 a.m. Doctors say I can probably go home Monday. Want to help me catch up on all the gossip I missed while unconscious? Maya texted back immediately. Yes, bring the good coffee. She spent the morning doing laundry and cleaning her apartment, moving through the familiar tasks with the kind of contentment that comes from resolved conflict. Around noon, she heard a knock on her door. Mrs. Kelly stood in the hallway, wearing a cardigan despite the warm day, looking at Maya with those sharp blue eyes. You made the call, Mrs. Kelly said. It wasn't a question. I went to see her, Maya said. She was in an accident, but we talked. Well, I talked, and she listened, and then she woke up and we both talked. It's going to be okay, Mrs. Kelly smiled. Good. I'm glad. The second storm passed without incident then. The chimes were just chimes, Maya confirmed. No patterns, no voices, just normal storm sounds. Then you're free, Mrs. Kelly said. Chimebrack has no hold on you. Whatever sentence you were carrying, it's been communicated instead of preserved. She paused. But Maya, there's something you should know. Something I didn't tell you before because I wanted you to make the call for the right reasons, not because you were afraid. Maya felt a chill despite the warm hallway. What? Chimebrack doesn't just collect sentences, Mrs. Kelly said. It collects people. Not their bodies, their patterns, their rhythms, their voices. Once it has enough of someone, once it's collected 3 storms worth of their intentions, it can reproduce them. Perfectly. Forever. You said Thomas Waite has been preserved for 15 years, Maya said slowly. You said the chimes ring his words during storms. They do, Mrs. Kelly confirmed. But it's more than that. After the third storm locked him in, after he'd given Chimebrack everything he meant to say but didn't, the thing learned him completely. Learned how he thought, how he spoke, how he moved through the world. And now, during the worst storms, when the rain is heavy enough and the gutters overflow in just the right way, you can see him. See him? A shape made of rain and metal and preserved intentions, Mrs. Kelly said. Walking the neighbourhood, looking in windows, trying to communicate with his daughters who don't live here anymore. He's not a ghost. Ghosts are what's left after someone dies. Thomas is what's left when someone stops communicating while they're still alive. He's preserved intention given form, a taxidermied collection of everything he meant to say. Maya thought about the coat-hung shape she'd seen under her soffit, the narrow head and 2 long arms, and the suggestion of a body made from gutters and downspouts. Is that what Chimebrack is? A collection of preserved people? Chimebrack is what holds the collection, Mrs. Kelly said. It's the container, the curator, the thing that decides what gets preserved and how. The shapes you see during storms, figures walking through the rain, those are the people who waited too long, the ones who let 3 storms pass without speaking. How many are there? Maya asked. Mrs. Kelly's expression was sad. In this neighbourhood, 7 that I know of. Thomas Waite, Frank's wife Margaret, who died without reconciling with her sister, a young man named David Chen, who never told his parents he was gay, a woman named Sarah Kim, who carried an apology to her son for 23 years. Others. They walk during the heavy storms trying to complete communications that can never be completed, because the people they meant to reach are gone or moved or stopped listening years ago. Maya thought about Frank standing in his garden, watering his plants, keeping his wind chimes up even though they rang his daughter's birthday wishes. Frank isn't preserved yet, is he? You said he's been locked in for 20 years, but he's still himself, still alive. Being locked in doesn't kill you, Mrs. Kelly said. It just means your intentions belong to Chimebrack now instead of to you. Frank can't communicate the things he meant to say because they're already preserved. The urge is gone, been taxidermied into metal. He lives with the chimes ringing his words every storm, but he can't actually speak them anymore. They're not his to give. That's horrible, Maya said. It is, Mrs. Kelly agreed, but it's also safe. Frank doesn't have to risk rejection or awkwardness or making things worse. His intentions exist in a perfect preserved state. They'll ring forever, unchanged, uncomplicated by actual communication. That's not safety, Maya said. That's death. Just a slow version of it. Yes, Mrs. Kelly said simply, which is why I'm glad you made a call. Why I'm glad you spoke instead of waiting. You would have been the 8th if you hadn't. Mrs. Kelly left, and Maya stood in her apartment doorway for a long time, thinking about preserved intentions and taxidermied communications, and people who'd let fear turn them into collections of everything they meant to say. She thought about calling her mother, who she hadn't spoken to in a year after a fight about Maya's broken engagement. Thought about the things she'd meant to say to her ex-fiancé before he moved across the country. Thought about the co-worker she'd been rude to 6 months ago and never apologised to. All the little preserved intentions that accumulated over a lifetime of avoiding difficult conversations. Maya made a list. Everyone she owed an apology, an explanation, a confession. Everyone she'd been putting off talking to because it felt too hard or too scary, or too likely to end badly. The list was longer than she expected, longer than she was comfortable with. But she'd seen what happened when you waited. Had seen Frank's wind chimes ringing his daughter's birthday wishes for 20 years. Had heard about Thomas Waite walking through storms as a collection of preserved I love yous that would never reach their intended recipients. Maya started making calls, her mother first. That conversation was difficult and tearful and didn't resolve everything, but it opened a door that had been closed for a year. They agreed to have coffee next weekend. Try talking face-to-face instead of carrying grudges, then her ex-fiancé. That call was shorter, more awkward. She managed to say she was sorry for how things ended, sorry for the things she'd said when she was hurt and angry, sorry for not trying harder to communicate before everything fell apart. He thanked her and said he was sorry too, and they hung up with the kind of closure that doesn't fix anything, but makes carrying the memory easier. The co-worker, that one was embarrassing, but necessary. Maya apologised for being rude, explained she'd been going through personal stuff and took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. The co-worker accepted the apology, and they made plans to have lunch next week. By Sunday evening, Maya had worked through most of her list. She felt exhausted and emotionally raw, but also lighter, like she'd been carrying weight she didn't realise she had, and speaking these preserved intentions out loud had made them into something finished instead of suspended. Monday morning she visited Rachel in the hospital with good coffee and bagels. Rachel was sitting up in bed, looking much better, complaining about hospital food and demanding gossip. They spent 2 hours talking, about the fight, about the 3 months of silence, about Rachel's accident and Maya's weird experience with Chimebrack, and everything they'd been too scared to say before. "So you think this gutter monster was going to preserve you?" Rachel asked, stealing Maya's coffee, because hers had gotten cold. "I know it sounds insane," Maya said. "It does," Rachel agreed. "But I also know you wouldn't make something like that up. And I know you've been weird about the weather since you moved into that building. So either you're having a very specific mental break, or your neighbourhood is actually haunted by a thing that collects unsaid apologies." "I'm not having a mental break," Maya said. "Okay," Rachel said easily. "Then your neighbourhood is haunted. Want to move in with me when I get discharged?" My apartment has shitty water pressure, but probably fewer gutter monsters, Maya laughed. Maybe, let me think about it. She did think about it. Over the next few weeks, as Rachel recovered and they rebuilt their friendship into something even stronger than it had been before, Maya thought about leaving the Victorian, about moving away from Chimebrack and the preserved intentions and the people who'd let fear turn them into collections of unsaid words. She thought about it, but she didn't do it, because leaving felt like running, and Maya had learned something from the whole experience. Staying and communicating was better than fleeing and preserving. That risk was better than safety. That messy, imperfect conversations were better than perfect taxidermied intentions that rang through storms forever. So she stayed, and she made it a rule to never let important words go unsaid for more than a day or two. To apologise quickly, to communicate messily if that's what it took, to risk rejection and awkwardness and making things worse because the alternative was preservation, and preservation was just another word for death. The neighbourhood had 3 more storms that year. Maya listened to them from her apartment, heard the wind chimes ring, paid attention to the patterns, and sometimes, during the heaviest rains, she heard voices in the metal. Not her own. She'd broken free of that. But others. Thomas Waite telling his daughters he loved them. Margaret reconciling with her sister. David Chen coming out to parents who couldn't hear him anymore. The preserved people walked during those storms. Maya saw them sometimes from her window, shapes made of rain and metal and intention, moving through the neighbourhood like memories given form. They looked in windows, knocked on doors that had been closed for decades, tried to complete communications that would never be completed. Frank's chimes still rang his daughter's birthday wishes. But Maya noticed over time that the chimes were sounding older, more worn. The metal was corroding, the tones becoming less clear. Even preserved intentions degraded eventually. Even taxidermied communications had a half-life. Maya kept her list updated. Every time she felt a sentence stick in her throat, every time she found herself drafting and deleting messages, she added the person's name to the list. And then she reached out. Called, texted, showed up with coffee and forced the conversation. Not all of them went well. Some ended badly. Some made things worse before they made them better. But Maya spoke instead of preserving, communicated instead of collecting, and the gutters never learned her heartbeat again. Mrs. Kelly died the following spring. Heart failure, peaceful, in her sleep. Maya went to the funeral and met Mrs. Kelly's family, children and grandchildren who'd driven in from 3 different states. They all had stories about Mrs. Kelly's wisdom, her warnings about the old rules, her insistence on communicating difficult things quickly before they had a chance to calcify into silence. After the funeral, Mrs. Kelly's son approached Maya. Mum said you had a close call with Chimebrack, he said. Said you almost got preserved. I did, Maya confirmed. She saved me, told me what I needed to know. She saved a lot of people over the years, he said. Made it her mission after what happened to Thomas Waite. She felt responsible somehow. Like if she'd warned him earlier, been more insistent, he might have made the call before the 3rd storm. Did she ever... Maya trailed off, not sure how to phrase the question. Did she ever get close to being preserved herself? Mrs. Kelly's son smiled sadly. Once, long time ago when my dad died. She carried an apology for months. Something about a fight they'd had the night before his heart attack. The gutters started clicking. The chimes started learning her voice. She figured out the rule herself. Placed the cloth, kept the silence, and the next morning she went to the cemetery and said everything she meant to say to his grave. Spoke out loud even though he couldn't hear her anymore. Said it mattered that the words existed in the world instead of just in metal. Maya thought about that a lot in the weeks after the funeral. About Mrs. Kelly speaking to a grave. About the importance of voiced communication even when the intended recipient was gone. About how preservation might feel like a comfort but was actually a trap. Summer came, and with it the storm season. Heavy rains every few days, the kind that made the gutters overflow and the wind chimes ring. Maya listened to them from her apartment and heard the neighbourhood's collection of preserved intentions. Heard Thomas Waite and Margaret and David Chen and Sarah Kim. Heard Frank's daughter's birthday wishes getting quieter as the chimes corroded. And sometimes, during the heaviest storms, she heard a new voice. Mrs. Kelly's voice. It wasn't preserved. It was memory. Maya would hear Mrs. Kelly's warnings in the rhythm of the rain, her wisdom in the pattern of the gutters, her insistence on communication instead of preservation in the coordination of the chimes. Not because Mrs. Kelly had been collected, but because Maya had listened when it mattered, had taken the advice and used it, had broken free before the 3rd storm locked her in. Rachel recovered fully from her accident and moved into an apartment closer to Maya's building. They had coffee every weekend, maintained the kind of regular communication that prevented small misunderstandings from calcifying into months-long silences. When they fought, and they did fight, because that's what close friends do, they talked about it within days instead of letting it fester. Maya kept working her data entry job but started taking night classes, psychology, with a focus on communication theory. She wanted to understand why people preserved instead of spoke, why silence felt safer than risk, why so many people in the neighbourhood had let fear turn them into collections of unsaid words. She wrote papers about chimbrack without naming it, framing the phenomenon as metaphor, discussed the psychological weight of unspoken apologies, the way preserved intentions could calcify into permanent barriers, the importance of messy communication over perfect silence. Her professors thought she was being poetic. Her classmates found her, examples oddly specific. But Maya knew she was writing about something real, about something that lived in gutter bends and soffit shadows, collecting the words people meant to say but didn't. 2 years after her first encounter with chimbrack, Maya was walking home from class when she noticed new wind chimes on Frank's porch. Shiny, new, different from the old tarnished ones. She stopped, staring. Frank was in his garden, moving more slowly than he had 2 years ago, but still tending his plants with careful attention. He looked up and saw Maya watching. "New chimes," he said, gesturing at them. Finally took the old ones down. "Why?" Maya asked, even though she thought she knew. "Because I called her," Frank said. "My daughter. After you and I talked 2 years ago, after I told you I'd waited too long, I kept thinking about it, kept hearing my own advice back at me. Don't wait. So I didn't. I called her. What happened? She hung up on me the first 3 times, Frank said. 4th time, she listened. 5th time, we talked. 6th time, we cried. She's coming to visit next month. First time in 23 years. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Frank, that's amazing. Yeah, he agreed. The weird thing is, after I actually talked to her, after I said all the things I'd been meaning to say, the old chimes stopped ringing my patterns, just became normal chimes again, like chimbrack lost interest once the words got spoken. Because they weren't preserved anymore, Maya said. They'd been communicated, completed, no longer suspended in that liminal space of intention without action. You studying this stuff? Frank asked, noticing the textbooks in Maya's bag. Sort of, Maya said, trying to understand it better, trying to help people avoid what almost happened to me. Frank nodded slowly. Good. We need more people like you in the neighbourhood. People who understand the old rules but don't let them become prisons. Mrs. Kelly used to say the rules weren't meant to trap us. They were meant to teach us, to show us what happened when we chose preservation over communication. They talked for a while longer, and then Maya continued home. She noticed as she walked that the neighbourhood sounded different. Fewer wind chimes. The ones that remained sounded clearer, newer, like they'd been replaced recently. She wondered how many people had broken free, how many had made the calls they'd been putting off, how many had chosen risk over preservation. That night there was a storm. Heavy rain, strong winds, the kind of weather that made the gutters overflow and the building creak. Maya listened from her bed, paying attention to the patterns. She heard the chimes, but they sounded random, uncoordinated, just metal and wind doing what physics dictated. No voices, no preserved intentions, just weather. But around midnight she heard something else, a soft tapping at her window. Maya got out of bed and opened the curtain. Standing on the fire escape outside her apartment was a shape made of rain and shadow. Not quite human, not quite metal, somewhere in between. She recognised it from the first night. A coat-hung shape, chimbrack itself. Maya's first instinct was to close the curtain, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But she'd learned something in the past 2 years about facing difficult things instead of avoiding them. She opened the window. The rain came in, cold and wet. Chimbrack leaned closer, and Maya could see that it didn't have a face, just a smooth expanse where features should be. Its body was made of braided downspouts and gutter sections, held together with something that looked like copper wire but moved like muscle. What do you want? Maya asked. Chimbrack made a sound like metal scraping metal. Not words, it couldn't speak, but meaning underneath the noise. Maya understood it the way you understand emotions in music. Wordless communication. It was hungry, but not for her anymore. She'd broken. Free. Spoken instead of preserving. Her intentions belonged to her again. I don't have anything for you, Maya said. Chimbrack tilted its non-head, considering. Then it raised one long arm and pointed past Maya, toward the apartment building below her unit. Maya understood. Someone else was carrying unspoken words. Someone else was close to being preserved. Who? She asked. Chimbrack pointed more specifically. Down and to the left. the apartment directly below Maya's, the unit where a young couple had moved in 6 months ago. Maya had seen them in the hallway sometimes, early 30s, both working long hours, communicating in the tired, efficient way that long-term couples develop. What are they not saying? Chimebrack couldn't answer that. It only collected the intentions, not the content. It knew someone was carrying weight, holding words, preserving instead of speaking. The specific sentences belonged to whoever was keeping them silent. Maya closed the window. Chimebrack remained on the fire escape for a moment, swaying in the storm, then dissolved back into rain and shadow. The next morning, Maya went downstairs and knocked on the apartment below hers. The young woman answered, dark circles under her eyes, stress written in the tension of her shoulders. "Hi," Maya said. "I'm Maya from upstairs. I know this is weird, but I wanted to check in, see if everything's okay. You look like you could use a friend." The woman, her name was Jennifer, stared at Maya with the particular suspicion that comes from having a stranger notice your problems. "Why would you think something's wrong?" "Because I live in this building," Maya said, "and I know about the gutters, and the chimes, and the thing that lives in them, and I think you might be carrying something you need to say before it gets preserved." Jennifer's expression shifted from suspicious to frightened. "You know about that? About the clicking that matches your heartbeat?" "I do," Maya said. "Can I come in? I promise I'm not crazy. Or if I am, I'm crazy in the same way you're crazy, which means we should probably talk." They talked for 2 hours. Jennifer and her husband Mark were going through something difficult. Infertility treatments, financial stress, a particular kind of grief that comes from wanting a child and not being able to have one. They'd stopped communicating about it weeks ago, both of them carrying their fears and frustrations and the crushing weight of repeated disappointment, both of them preserving instead of speaking because it felt easier than risking another painful conversation. The gutters had started clicking in Jennifer's heartbeat 3 nights ago. The chimes had started learning her voice. She hadn't known what it meant until Maya explained. "You need to talk to him," I said. "Tonight, before the next storm. Say everything you've been keeping silent. Risk the pain and the awkwardness and the possibility that talking won't fix. Anything. Because I promise you, preservation is worse." Jennifer called in sick to work. Mark did the same. They spent the day talking, crying, arguing, finally communicating all the things they'd been too scared to say. It was messy and imperfect and didn't solve their problems, but it broke the preservation. It gave voice to the intentions instead of letting Chimebrack collect them. That night, during the storm, Maya listened from her apartment. The gutters clicked randomly. The chimes rang without coordination. No voices, no patterns, no preserved intentions. Jennifer and Mark's marriage didn't magically fix itself because they had one difficult conversation. They kept talking, kept communicating instead of preserving, and the gutters never learned their heartbeats. Maya made it her mission after that, watching the neighbourhood, paying attention to the storms, noticing when the chimes started coordinating. She'd knock on doors, start conversations, share her story about Chimebrack and preserved intentions and the importance of speaking before the third storm locked you in. Some people thought she was crazy. Some people shut the door in her face. But enough people listened. Enough people made the calls they'd been putting off. Enough people chose risk over preservation. The neighbourhood changed slowly. More of the old wind chimes came down, replaced with new ones or nothing at all. The shapes that walked during storms, Thomas Waite and Margaret and David Chen and Sarah Kim, became fainter, less defined, as if Chimebrack was losing its hold on them as fewer new people got preserved. 3 years after her first encounter with Chimebrack, Maya finished her degree. She started a practice as a therapist specialising in communication. Her office was in the neighbourhood, in a converted house 2 blocks from her apartment. She didn't advertise much. Word of mouth was enough. People who'd lived through the clicking gutters and coordinating chimes found their way to her. She helped them understand what had almost happened, helped them learn to communicate instead of preserve, helped them break free before the third storm, and sometimes, during sessions, Maya would hear the rain start outside, would hear the gutters overflow, would watch her clients' faces change as they recognised the clicking, coordination, the suggestion of their own voices in the metal. "That's the sound," they'd say. "That's what I've been hearing." And Maya would tell them the same thing Mrs. Kelly had told her. "You have time, not much, but enough. Make the call, say the words, risk the rejection, because preservation isn't safety, it's death, just a slow version of it." Most of them made the call, most of them broke free. If you didn't, if you chose preservation, chose the safety of taxidermied intentions over the risk of actual communication. Maya would hear their voices in the storms, their patterns in the chimes, and she'd feel the particular sadness. It comes from watching someone choose their own prison. She kept trying, kept warning. kept helping people break free. 5 years after her first encounter, Maya saw Frank's daughter visit. A woman in her 40s with Frank's eyes and her mother's nose standing in Frank's garden with her arm around his shoulders. They were both crying, both talking, both finally communicating things that had been preserved for too long. Maya watched from her window and felt something like hope. The neighbourhood wasn't free of Kimmy Brack, might never be free of it. The thing that lived in gutter bends and soffit shadows was too old, too patient, too sustained by human fear to ever fully disappear. But it was weaker than it had been. Fewer people to collect, fewer intentions to preserve, fewer voices to ring through the storms. Rachel moved into the building eventually, taking the apartment Frank vacated when he moved to be closer to his daughter. She and Maya had weekly dinners, monthly movie, nights, the kind of regular communication that kept small things from becoming big things. When they fought, and they still fought sometimes, they talked about it within hours instead of days. Never let anything fester long enough to feed Chimebrack. Maya's practice grew. She published papers about communication theory, about the weight of unspoken words, about the importance of risk over preservation. She never mentioned Chimebrack by name in academic contexts. The people who needed to understand did. The people who'd heard the clicking, seen the shapes, felt their intentions being collected. They came to her office during storms and said things they'd been preserving, made calls from her phone when their own hands shook too much, drafted messages with her help, messages that got sent instead of deleted. And slowly, conversation by conversation, the neighbourhood healed. 10 years after her first encounter with Chimebrack, Maya stood on her porch during a storm, the same porch, where she'd first heard the clicking, first seen the coat-hung shape, first felt her heartbeat being conducted by her gutters. She was 42 now, older, more scarred by life but also more confident, more willing to risk communication than preserve silence. The rain fell heavy, the gutters overflowed, the wind chimes rang, but they rang randomly, chaotically, just metal and wind and physics. Maya listened carefully for voices, the patterns, the preserved intentions of people who'd waited too long. She heard Thomas wait sometimes, very faintly, like a radio station almost out of range, his I love yous to daughters who'd moved across the country and built lives he'd never been part of. But even Thomas sounded weaker now, the preservation degrading after decades of repetition. Margaret was silent. Her reconciliation with her sister had degraded past the point of audibility. David Chen's coming out had faded to occasional whispers during the heavier storms. Sarah Kim's apology to her son was barely a suggestion anymore. The people who'd been preserved were finally dissolving, their taxidermied intentions breaking down, releasing back into the air, becoming nothing instead of something. Chimebrack was losing its collection. Maya felt something touch her shoulder. She turned and saw the creature standing beside her on the porch, made of rain and metal and the fading echoes of 100 unspoken sentences. It looked weaker than it had 10 years ago, less defined, harder to see even when you were looking directly at it. "You're hungry," Maya said. Chimebrack made its scraping metal sound. Agreement. Desperation. "I don't have anything for you," Maya said. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you preserve people. Won't help you. This neighbourhood is learning to speak instead of staying silent, learning to risk instead of preserve. You're dying, and I'm not going to save you." Chimebrack swayed in the rain. For a moment, Maya thought it might try to take her anyway, might try to force preservation even without her cooperation. The creature was too weak, too diminished by years of people breaking free, making calls, speaking their preserved intentions out loud. It dissolved back into the storm, not dying. Chimebrack was too old to die completely, but weakening, fading, losing form as its collection degraded and fewer people fed it new material. Maya stood on her porch until the storm passed, then went inside to her warm apartment. Rachel was there, making tea, asking about Maya's day. They talked easily, naturally, the way people do when communication is a habit instead of a risk. That night, Maya slept without dreams. The gutters dripped, the chimes hung silent, the neighbourhood rested, and in the gutter bends and soffit shadows Chimebrack waited, patient as weather, hungry as always, ready to collect any intention that got preserved instead of spoken. But the collection was small now, the voices faint, the preservation degrading, the neighbourhood was learning. And in a storm-wrapped neighbourhood, Chimebrack doesn't steal your words. It preserves your urge to say them until the chimes learn your voice and the night starts calling for you. But only if you let it, only if you choose preservation over risk, silence over communication, safety over the messy reality of actually speaking. Maya had chosen to speak, had taught others to speak, had weakened the thing that fed on silence. and that, she thought, was enough. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Turning down in sheets that night, turning downtown into a drowned labyrinth of black glass and bleeding neon. Sarah's Honda cut through standing water, tires hissing, wipers thrashing uselessly against the deluge. She'd been driving for 3 hours, circling the same 12 blocks, putting off the inevitable return to her apartment, where eviction notices waited like accusatory fingers pointed at her failures. The parking garage mouth opened on 5th Street, a concrete maw exhaling the smell of piss and motor oil. She yanked the wheel hard, diving into its throat away from the storm. The transition was immediate and wrong. Outside, the rain roared. Inside, it whispered. Water dripped from expansion joints and rebar in a rhythm that felt deliberate, timed, like something breathing through punctured lungs. The headlights swept across rows of empty spaces, pillars marching into shadow. She picked a spot on the 3rd level, beneath a ceiling stained with decades of water damage, and leaked fluids. The engine ticked as it cooled. She kept her hands on the wheel, knuckles white, and let herself feel the full weight of how fucked she was. Rent 3 months behind, credit cards maxed, her mother's voice on the last call, "You always do this, Sarah. You always wait until you're drowning to ask for help." She wasn't going to ask. Not anymore. Asking made it worse. Asking gave people permission to pity you, and pity was just cruelty with a kind face. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m. in cold blue digits. She'd left the bar at midnight, drove to the Overlook where she used to go with David before the divorce, sat there for an hour watching the city lights blur through rain-streaked glass, then just drove. Anywhere. Nowhere. The Honda's gas gauge hovered near empty, another problem she couldn't afford to solve. $17 in her checking account. $17 fucking dollars, and her phone bill would autodraft tomorrow for $63. She should have stayed in. The car. Should have just sat there until the rain stopped or morning came or someone found her and asked what the hell she was doing, haunting a parking garage at 3 a.m. like some kind of ghost who'd forgotten she was dead. But her bladder was screaming and the garbage coffee from the gas station wanted out, so she pushed the door open and stepped into air that tasted like rust and standing water. The cold hit her immediately. Not winter cold, it was September, still warm during the day, but the particular damp cold that concrete holds even in summer, amplified by rain and darkness and the absence of any human warmth. She wrapped her jacket tighter and started toward the stairwell, fishing in her purse for the pepper spray she'd bought after the thing with David's brother, the incident neither of them talked about but that had ended with her moving out 3 days early and sleeping on Rachel's couch for a week. That's when she saw the stain, chest height on the nearest, support column, maybe 6 feet from her front bumper. A discoloured patch, darker than the surrounding concrete, shaped vaguely like an elongated oval. Water had carved channels through years of accumulated grime, creating lines that suggested, no, insisted, that this wasn't random. Her brain, desperate for pattern and meaning, assembled the chaos into something recognisable. 2 darker spots for eyes, a smear that could be a nose, a crack running horizontal that looked too much like a mouth mid-sentence. She told herself it was nothing. Pareidolia. The human brain's stupid compulsion to find faces in toast and clouds and water stains. She couldn't look away. The headlights held it in perfect illumination, and the longer she stared, the more details emerged. The curve of a cheek, the hollow of an eye socket, something in the arrangement of shadows that suggested not peace but waiting. Her wipers gave one final sweep, thwick thwick, before shutting off, and in that moment the face seemed to blink. Or rather, the shadows shifted in a way that her exhausted brain interpreted as a blink, and her stomach dropped 6 inches. "Fuck off," she muttered, but her voice came out small, swallowed by the garage's acoustic enormity. The echo came back wrong, delayed by a fraction of a second too long. The consonants softened into something that sounded like fuck offered, like the building was making a suggestion instead of swallowing her curse. She forced herself to move, walking toward the stairwell, footsteps too loud on wet concrete. Each step echoed and multiplied, so it sounded like 3 or 4 people walking in loose synchronization, slightly off-beat, like a crowd that had forgotten how to march together. Her shadow stretched long and distorted under the fluorescent lights, bending around pillars, splitting and reforming in ways that made it hard to tell where she ended and the architecture began. A puddle spread across her path, maybe 3 feet wide, fed by a steady drip from overhead pipes. She could see the source, the joint where 2 sections of ceiling met, water beading on rusted metal before falling in perfect drops, each impact sending ripples across the puddle's surface. She stepped around it, glancing down reflexively. Her reflection waited in the water, except it wasn't standing. It was kneeling, hands clasped at chest level, head bowed like someone in prayer or begging for mercy. Sarah's real body stopped moving. She looked down at herself, jeans, sneakers standing upright, then back at the puddle. The kneeling figure remained perfectly still, water rippling gently across its bowed head. She backed away fast, sneakers squeaking, and knocked into her car's side mirror hard enough to send pain shooting through her hip. The impact jolted her. She spun, expecting, what? Someone behind her? There was nothing. Just pillars and shadows and the relentless drip, drip, drip counting down some timeline she didn't understand. The stain on the pillar looked different from this angle. The mouth seemed to curve upward now, almost gentle, almost welcoming. The kind of expression you'd see on a saint in a cathedral. Someone painted to forgive your worst confessions. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. A pressure she'd been holding since the first eviction notice, maybe longer, since her father's funeral, since the miscarriage. Since the moment she realised that being an adult meant carrying weight that never got lighter, only heavier, until something in you cracked, and you found yourself standing in a parking garage at 2 a.m. looking for faces in water damage. I need this to stop, she whispered. Not to the stain. Not to anything. Just words escaping before she could cage them. I need something to fucking work for once. The garage breathed around her. Every drip seemed to synchronise, falling in perfect rhythm now. A tempo she could almost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like a heartbeat. Like a rosary being counted by something patient and vast. She walked closer to the pillar. She didn't decide to. Her legs just moved. Drawn by the same gravity that makes you lean over railings on tall buildings, that makes you press bruises to feel the hurt confirm itself. The concrete smelled like wet stone and something else. Something organic and sweet like flowers rotting in standing water. Up close, the face was undeniable. Not painted, not carved, but there, assembled from accident and erosion into something her hindbrain recognised as other, as witness. The eyes seemed to track her, though that was impossible. They were just stains, just mineral deposits and mould. They looked and she felt looked at. The detail was extraordinary. Tiny cracks radiated from the eye spots like crow's feet, suggesting age or sorrow or both. The darker stain that formed the mouth had a texture to it, almost like lips, with a faint vertical line down the centre that could have been a scar or just a deeper crack in the concrete. Water had pooled in the shallow depression of one eye, making it gleam wetly, making it look alive. She reached out without thinking, fingertips hovering an inch from the surface. The concrete radiated cold. Not the passive cold of stone, but an active cold, the kind that reaches out and pulls heat from your skin. Her breath showed in the air now, little clouds that dissipated slowly in the headlight's glow. The puddle was to her left now, just at the edge of her peripheral vision. She didn't want to look, couldn't help it. Turned her head slowly. The kneeling reflection had lifted its head. It was staring directly at her, face slack with exhaustion and hope, and above it, floating in the water like an icon held aloft during a procession, was the stained face from the pillar, hovering over the kneeling Sarah like a blessing or a claim. "What the fuck do you want?" Her voice cracked on the last word. The echo came back as want, bouncing between pillars, multiplying, until the garage was full of her own need reflected back at her in stereo. The temperature dropped. Not much, maybe 5 degrees, but enough that her breath showed more clearly, thick white clouds that hung in the air before dissipating. The dripping water slowed, each drop falling with exaggerated care, and in the silence between impacts she heard something else. A whisper. Not words, just the shaped absence of words, the way silence sounds when someone's holding their breath to listen. She should run, get in the car, reverse out of this place, drive until the gas ran out. But exhaustion had weight, and fear had gravity, and there was something in the way the face's expression seemed to soften that made her think, stupidly, desperate, that maybe if she just asked the right way, if she just explained how tired she was, how scared, how close to the edge, maybe something would shift. Maybe the universe would notice her suffering and adjust itself accordingly. Her hand moved toward the pillar. She didn't lift it consciously. It just rose, palm out, fingers spread, reaching for the cold concrete like a supplicant touching a shrine. Behind her, somewhere deeper in the garage, an engine started. The sound was distant but distinct, echoing through the concrete maze. Sarah froze, hand still extended, and listened. The engine revved once, twice, then settled into an idle. She waited for headlights to sweep across the pillars, for the car to emerge from wherever it was parked, but nothing came. just the steady rumble of an engine running somewhere she couldn't see. "Hello?" Her voice sounded thin and scared even to her own ears. No response. The engine continued its idle, a low growl that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, reflected and distorted by the garage's acoustics, until she couldn't tell if it was behind her, or above her, or somehow inside the walls themselves. She pulled her hand back and turned, scanning the rows of parked cars. There were maybe a dozen vehicles scattered across this level, and any one of them could be the source. Except they were all dark, windows empty, and that engine sounded wrong anyway. Too deep, too rough, like something older than anything she saw here. Like a diesel truck from the 70s, or a muscle car with a blown exhaust. The sound cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that felt too complete. Even the dripping had stopped. Sarah stood perfectly still, heart hammering, and tried to remember if she'd seen anyone else when she'd driven up. The ticket booth at the entrance had been automated, no attendant, and the other levels had looked empty in the brief glimpses she'd caught spiralling up to the 3rd floor. The dripping resumed, different now, faster, irregular,